Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to the Seger Spar pre-IFED training session, sparring session. Okay, under the motion as EU, this house would immediately lift the ban on palm oil. Judging with me would be Iren. Acting as the government team, we have Amos, Elmo, and also Ariel. And then in the opposition, we have uh, Charlie, Randy, and also Dio as the for the reply speech, it will be delivered by Amos and maybe Randy. Okay, so without further ado, now I would like to call upon Amos to start the debate. Here.
Starting my speech in five, four, three, two, one. I think that the model for opening government is very clear. For government side is pretty clear, right? I think that we want to lift this like ASAP. We want to drop all cases from WTO. I think that the model honestly like is like probably that simple. Maybe Charlie would prove me wrong, but anyway, but we are okay for environmental things as well, right? We are okay with like gerakan sawit baik and those type of things. Maybe we can still endorse them. I don't think it's necessary just to like ban them 100%, right? But anyway, that aside, I think that the three things that government wants to prove in this debate, right? Number one is I would like to prove why most likely the case would fail, and like second, I'm going to explain what type of retaliation has been done and how that hurts the EU economy to a large extent, and number three, how this actually empowers our opposition, and I'm going to explain this later as well, right? Wait, that's the three things that I'm going to explain here. Hey, number one, I think that the case would most likely fail anyway, right? Why is that so? Because the constitution of WTO never said anything about the environment, right? It's like 100% not never talking about that, and it's clearly stated in the constitution at the end of the day that environment should not be a factor in terms of trade, right? It's like purely only economy. That's basically the constitution, and that's exactly why WTO can make Indonesia can make this form of a team at the end of the day, because it's like a very legit appeal in the very first place, right? That's the first defense. But if you take a look at Indonesia's case of papers and how, I mean, not only Indonesia actually, like so many nations that are disenfranchised by this palm oil thing. The case that they brought is that EU has way more carbon emissions, right? They basically hurt the environment more. Like their index is like exponentially more. Their multinational companies like basically harm even more as well, right? I think that this is if the defense that EU actually gives at the end of the day is in terms of environment, then this case is enough for WTO to prove that EU doesn't even care, and therefore they cannot actually do those type of bans anyway, right? Because they're actually the worst actor like in terms of like all these other nations. So I think that that's exactly why they would actually lose, right? But I think that the third thing that I would like to explain is the fact that EU's interest is never about environment to begin with, right? We still do trades with China, even though they have the biggest carbon emission. Like, I mean, I know that they're the market leaders of green technology, but honestly, just look at their carbon emissions. It's basically talking about, it's basically like so high, it's like it's second highest in the world, and those type of things, right? So I think that they basically do not care. That's why like they still trade with so many other nations. They still, to an extent, traded with US under Trump in the past. So I don't think that environment in the very first place is the thing that is most important. That is most important to them anyway, right? Okay, that's me explaining what EU's interest is and why they would most likely lose the case, right? Okay, so now let's go how it actually impacts EU's economy, right? So, uh, as government, I would like to elucidate of what actually has happened to EU because of this. Right? I think EU is like in a really weak state of economy. They have just like um not long ago it was like talking about Brexit and how like just the British left, and they're basically also handling like COVID really badly. Like there's so many nations that are hit by COVID like real bad. I mean like the economy is just really that bad, and I think that the effect of this ban that the EU actually did in the very first place is that is that like there are like countermeasures that these countries actually use, right? This looks like not buying any of our exports anymore. I think if I'm not mistaken, most of some of them it's like corn, cotton, like coal. Wait, not coal actually. I just like there's so many objects. It's like basically reducing EU's trade by like 40%, which is like a really big chunk of economy. And this was clearly stated it's because of EU's ban on palm oil, because so many of those nations actually really needed our palm oil. Some of those nations really needed palm oil in their economy. I'm sorry, I worded that wrong, right? So that's why their retaliation is just that big to EU. I think that opposition might say, oh, but these nations also need a place to sell their to sell other goods or get other goods, right? Yeah, that's true. But the EU is just not the best. not the only option out there, right? There's like so many other places such as India, such as Russia. Like Russia most likely has already like also expanded the market to an extent as well. So I think that there are other alternatives if EU wants to continue this type of ban, right? I think that that's exactly why like EU most likely would be the one hit most by the economy. Like honestly, like those nations who are the ones who are basically banning our palm oil, who we ban palm oil, are also the nations who are like having a big chunk of our market, right? I think, and also what actually happens is actually called um block embargo, right? So because like you're embargoing one certain nation, I mean because of a ban and because they do not want to trade with you, like their allies also do not want to trade with you because like there's like certain pacts in like so many nations such as ASEAN and such as ASEAN, which also prevents EU from trading with so many other partners at the end of the day, right? This is exactly why that part of the economy is very harmful. But I think that the comparative is pretty clear, right? When we lift this type of ban, we can have access to trades to the countries that have already, I don't know, do not want to trade with us anymore, right? Such as Malaysia, such as Indonesia. And I think it's intuitive also to say that their allies will also want to trade us even more because of these pacts, not because we have already lifted the things that affected the pact and agreement of no trades for other nations as well. So I think that's exactly why it would help the economy of EU. Like we would have more trading partners, we would at least recover trading partners as well. This will like help our economy at the end of the day, right? Because they're most of our markets, they're the ones who basically import from us the most. So it's better on our side. But I think that extending to this case, I've just mentioned that there are like certain countries who are benefiting from this in a sense, like because it's like because like so the political and economical condition today is always talking about how we can get global markets like such as like US, such as Russia, such as China, and those type of things. There are actually many countries such as even Indonesia, such as Malaysia, who are actually now trading with Russia in terms of like palm oil and those type of things, right? So I think that um it actually increased their economy by a lot. Like they're taking away our market share from EU. That's yeah, they're basically like talking like taking away a lot uh, of our market share that's actually there. So I think that because they are a good replacement to you, like they can also import the same stuff. Basically, just it's just coming from another source. It's actually becoming harmful because use actually like putting a lot of embargoes and interventions towards like Russia right now, right? And if Russia gets more global trade partners or global trade partners or like global market in general, the extent of the effectivity of how EU can embargo Russia, for example, is something that is lessening, right? Because now that means that Russia's economy isn't necessarily um, reliant on EU, for example, right? They can just go somewhere else because there's no more global marketplaces that because they do not want to trade with EU anymore, that these places become really good alternatives, right? So I think that's exactly why, like in terms of like soft power, this decreases EU's effectivity in handling issues such as Belarus, such as the issue in Ukraine, because of these embargoes like being less and less effective, and more market control in global is like having taken care of by Russia, right? I mean, like it's evident. It's actually like pretty evident that even in the status quo, Russia have already increased in terms of their economy. I mean because they got this type of market share, and of course on the other side, comparatively, we would like most likely stop this. We can get a few places of our market shares back because this ban is just like because this ban is just like really damaging towards those nations as well in terms of their economy. So that is why, as EU, I think that we really should just lift this ban. I'm very proud to open this debate.
All right, I thank Amos for the speech. Now, to start the opposition's case, I would like to call upon Charlie. The floor is yours.
Starting my speech in three, two, one. So before I move on to explain to you why immediately lifting the ban on palm oil would be a wrong move from for EU's, I would like to give several rebuttals before I move on to my cases. First of all, about how World Trade Organization doesn't talk about doesn't say that environment should not be a factor for trade. That is objectively wrong. WTO is creates a provisions against anti-competitive clauses for example, they are prohibiting you to create, um, for example, a policy that prevents competition in a market, in export and import through the government subsidy and all. However, they still allow companies to create a standard for their export and import. That's why you're seeing ISO about human rights, for example. That's why you are seeing textile factory in Indonesia talking about LGBT discrimination, because in order to export to another country, you also need to able to pass this certification, and this certification is allowed. This certification is a part of the sovereignty of each nation to decide the standard of the products that come to their country, and um, which makes which is actually a tricky case in the WTO, right? When the EU make an argument about how this commodity is inherently damaging to the environment, and we do not want to export commodities that damage the environment, I think it is not as clear cut as the government side of the house said, whether or not this banning of the commodity falls in line with the idea of how sovereign nations can actually create a standards to decide which commodities and what kind of commodities can be allowed to be exported and to be imported in from one country to another. Like another case that which I think why this that I need to note is that how dispute settlements is never a short affair. Even if countries are engaging in a clearly anti-competitive behavior, like what's seeing in the Boeing versus Airbus case, EU against US, that settlement is basically lasts for years and even decades. I think immediately lifting the ban of the palm oil means that immediately cutting off the years of impact that can be caused by us banning the palm oil itself. And I'm going to prove to you why that is very important for our case. Second of all, I must argue about block embargo, about how it could actually trigger other nations to also prevent trading with EU. That is wrong. ASEAN has no deals like that because ASEAN is also believes in the non-interventionist. We are also not a political union. What happens to in Malaysia, what happens in Indonesia is not a problem for Vietnam. Therefore, if Vietnam sees that trading with EU is beneficial, which it is, then they're going to continue again. And second of all, embargo to Russia is effective. Not it does have correlation with the embargo imposed by EU to Indonesia, because embargo to Russia is effective because of the geopolitical situation of Russia, which is basically neighboring with EU. So I don't think that is basically impactful for with a situation with Russia at all. But moving on, let's talk about our stance first, right? Our stance is clear. We are not going to lift the ban unless the dispute settlement, which I have said to you, most likely would last for years and or even decades, hopefully, doesn't go in our favor. So when dispute settlement shows that we have to lift the ban, then we are going to lift the ban. And instead, we are going to impose a strict limitation and certification on our importing policy. We are going to impose certification towards exporters that make them comply to sweep away human rights abuse in their supply chain, and also create a standard where the supplier cannot be allowed to do an illegal deforestation, and that needs to impose a sustainable farming in their clause. But let me emphasize to you, in my first case, gentlemen, banning commodity is a far more powerful and effective policy than this certification. Why is that so? It has got to do with the global supply chain of the palm oil itself. It is extremely hard to trace the complex web of subcontracting in global supply chain. What did I mean with subcontracting? Let me explain to you. It works like this, right? Most likely, when Nestle needs some palm oils, they're going to contract a reliable producer. The problem is that this producer, most likely to fulfill the demand from Nestle, is going to subcontract to another farmers. And the farmers, most likely to fulfill this huge demand, is going to also subcontract to another farmers itself. This web of subcontracting makes it very complex and makes it very hard for you to investigate and to know where did you get those palm oils. And most likely, ladies and gentlemen, this network of global supply chain of palm oil would also fall into these farmers doesn't comply with the human rights standard, that use reckless forest burning to open up land in order to plant palm oils, and to know whether or not the palm oil that you are getting is risks of this human right abuse and deforestation is extremely hard, because most likely Nestle or their first party that they contracted to supply the palm oil do not know the all of the producer of the palm oils that they are getting. Therefore, by banning the commodity, you're also you're actually basically targeting the root cause of this deforestation itself, which means an abundance of demands that push you to produce, produce, and produce, which push you to do deforestation, which push you to produce more palm oils, to far exceeding the regeneration time needed for the soil to recover from this palm oil plantation. In order to save the Indonesian rainforest, in order to save them to stop the deforestation, you need to reduce the demand for palm oil, so they stop producing much more than they can manage to take. And that's what banning the commodity is. We are basically cutting off the demand of palm oil in Indonesia. Yes, the demand would still be there, but at least it's going to be reduced. The rate of deforestation is going to be reduced, and it is going to buy us enough time in order to stop the environmental degradation that can endanger us. Which brings me to the second layer. Why this is extremely important for EU, right? Because deforestation is still a big cause for climate change, right? With deforestation, you are preventing our rainforest to actually reduce the carbon emission that could create a disaster to create climate change. And we are already suffering from the impact of climate change in EU. We are seeing more heat waves, tornadoes that actually cost us lives. Amos might point out the hypocrisy in EU's part, because they're also emitting carbon emission. But let this be clear, that it's still an interest of EU to actually reduce the carbon emission and to prevent the climate change into a devastating rate. And this is extremely very important now, because we are actually very close to create a structural change that can save us climate change. We are seeing solar, wind, and water electricity getting cheaper. We are seeing actually fossil fuel be getting left out and even and reduced in price year by year. We need to buy us time so we can delay the devastating climate change, because if we have passed the 200 degrees, 2 degrees Celsius, we are all going to die. And while Amos might like it, I don't. We beg to oppose.
For the speech. Now, to extend the case of the government, I would like to call upon Elmo. The time is yours. Here.
All right. So I'm starting in three, 2, 1. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it's still in the best interest of the EU to lift this ban on palm oil, both for principle and practical reasons. I have two arguments to bring. First, regarding the accessibility of sunflower oil in itself, and second, how better regulation can happen on our side. But before I get to that, there are several points of rebuttal that I would like to make to the opposition team. First of all, let's talk about how they keep insisting that it's within the interest of the EU to minimize the carbon emissions and so on. They talk about things like provision certifications and standards of provision. We believe that this is just much harder to defend for EU because, one, as my prime minister had stated, the EU themselves have done worse in the terms of environmental harms. They still have high levels of carbon emission, and even if they brought up things about anti-competitive policies, there are still restraints on what you can use as a parameter, and the environment strictly isn't one of them. But even if this whole matter with climate change is really that important for the EU, even if this climate change harms EU themselves, the current economy is more urgent within the status quo, with COVID and unemployment and even Brexit in EU themselves. The extent of economic damage is already higher, both in the EU themselves and even worse in these developing countries who rely on these palm oils. So we believe that both countries can only receive harm from
from limiting these palm oil circulations. But onto my next rebuttal, they stated a point about WTO, how they would create a policy that prevents competition, but companies can still create standards. Here, regardless of how neutral WTO plans to be, we feel that there is still already an existing uneven power between EU, who's a big developed country, and developing countries like Indonesia, meaning that even if there is a deal, it wouldn't be a fair one. Furthermore, opposition still haven't rebutted the fact that there is a chance of failure and how this failure will impact both parties negatively, especially the EU themselves, as my prime minister has explained, economically. But even if these deals succeed and it's truly fair, the upsets so themselves. It's going to take years, and within these years, countless people, especially from these developing countries, will take so many harms trying to adjust. Many of them will lose more jobs, and their quality of life will further be reduced. With all of my rebuttals done, I'd like to get into my argument. First, regarding the accessibility of sunflower oil. So let's take the opposition under our best case scenario, assuming that the EU truly is that benevolent, that they truly want to protect the world's environment and so on. The thing is, sunflower oil is not necessarily accessible to everyone. It needs a specific kind of climate, and there's a limited supply and lots of demand. Because aside from the obvious Indonesia and Malaysia, many developing countries still rely on palm oil either as export or energy source. So now that you know how strictly limited sunflower oil is compared to the more readily available palm oil, what will happen if you limit its circulation? You'd be robbing multiple developing countries of their income and energy, and these countries pretty much have no other alternatives. Why? Well, what will we, the EU, do to take responsibility for crippling these developing countries? In countries that can't produce sufficient palm oils, will we export some of our own sunflower oil there, assuming that we actually have enough to sustain ourselves first? We believe that this just can't happen because it's not feasible in the long term. Why? Because first, that plan is highly contingent on us having enough sunflower to begin with. But secondly, this also creates scarcity where the demand strongly outweighs the supply, which in turn causes inflation, meaning that even if but then again, even if we have enough sunflower oil to carry the economy and energy requirements of both ourselves and multiple countries behind our backs, what do you think will happen when you're the only number one exporter of a highly sought after resource with no other alternative? This relates to my argument before about unfair deals. Monopoly would happen, increased prices, which combined with these developing countries who already have a low initial buying power to begin with, will be completely devastating to these countries. Knowing this, what other alternatives are there? Will you push these developing countries to suddenly start building sunflower plantations enough to sustain their entire country? We believe that this is also unfeasible because that would take years to complete, and during those years, the people would continue to suffer from the aforementioned economic harms. This connects to our goal, meaning that this will affect our standing with the rest of the world. You kill the economies of multiple countries, and some of these countries are significant enough for the rest of the world. Developing countries as they may be, they have allies with louder voices, but even without outside intervention, some of these developing countries still have a prominent presence on their own. For example, Indonesia is one of the countries with the largest buying power, market, and population in Southeast Asia. So if say one day Indonesia decided to say that they hate you, they could boycott your products and you'd lose a sizable income for the EU. Combined with the backing from similar developed countries and similar developing countries and more developed ones with louder voice in the world stage, the EU's reputation will take a significant hit. But why is reputation so important for us to begin with? Because consider the status quo. In the middle of Brexit and COVID, our economy is plummeting. Not just us, but the entire world. We, as well as the world, cannot get through this alone, especially developing countries who, even without COVID, is already struggling enough as they are. So we really don't need another unnecessary economic war with the world right now, especially when it's almost assured that our enemies, quote unquote, these developing countries would most assuredly lose and end up crippled and devastated even further. Case on point, inflation and or monopoly, which I mentioned before. We don't want to make more enemies during a time when cooperation is so important to the world. But even once COVID and Brexit passes someday, cooperation is still necessary. Export and import moves the economic wheel worldwide. We need an exchange of resources, specialties, jobs, and so on. And all of these can only happen when we have allies to trade with. And how do we best gain allies? By saving these developing countries in their time of need. Here, we can accomplish this by lifting the palm oil ban. Because through this, we give these developing countries an alternative, a way out of the economic crisis that they're currently stuck in. But the pragmatic making allies mindset aside, we believe that this is just the morally right thing to do compared to the opposite, where we actively take part in killing multiple countries' economy, worsening the quality of life of thousands of people. Therefore, we've proven to you that both principally and practically, it's within our best interest to lift the palm oil ban. So, onto my second argument, why issues on environment and deforestation would be better on our side. Here, when the ban is lifted and the export is made legal, this will result in better regulation. How so? So, first of all, we EU as the major market are able to demand how the export is done. We know that this requires a humane process, no massive deforestation and better regulation and so on. And these things can be better done with Indo and Malay once they understand that if they don't follow this protocol, the ban can be implemented again, something they obviously don't want. Plus, understanding these products are highly demanded, they will take better care of it so not to lose these so valuable resources. If we just ban these resources outright, we have no control over how exports and deforestation happens, which will in turn be worse for the long term. Here, UP needs to prove why after this long process, it's so ideal for both parties to actually fulfill the extreme roles that UP has portrayed, which we've already proven to you why these better regulations can only happen if the ban is lifted. For all these reasons, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, let's welcome the second speaker of opposition here.
I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, in order for Team Proposition to win this debate, Team Proposition needs to defend a word when EU has made a bold directive called RED2, which aimed to ban the use of palm oil. Why is it good for EU to suddenly, just 2 years later, flip their stance and want to immediately lift the ban on the directive that they initiated 2 years ago, right? There are maybe two things that might happen due to this inconsistent political statement. Number one, EU will be seen as a loser, that they are shaky and suddenly flip once a country like Indonesia or Malaysia contest or challenge their proposal or directive. Number two, EU will be seen as an inconsistent trading partner in commodities, especially when it comes to oil and its alternative. Look, Deputy Prime Minister wants to talk about a more extensive political ally for the European Union. But the prerequisite of you having a political ally in international politics is highly contingent on your sustainable and consistent political manner at the end of the day, right? I think flipping the directive that you are really fighting for 2 years ago, for example, I don't necessarily think that there is the benefit that team government is trying to achieve at the end of the day. We say that it's going to leave a bad precedence for European Union, because when we talk about commodities, I think other countries look for a partner that is more consistent, a partner whose international trading policy more sustainable, because it gives your political ally more certainties. Ladies and gentlemen, sudden change or sudden political move will hamper your other political partner at the end of the day, right? Look, in this debate, we are talking about oil and its alternative. Our directive and policies regarding those commodities should be consistent and sustainable, simply because these types of commodities are very crucial to each country's, ladies and gentlemen. Country's entire technology operationalization is highly contingent on oil supply. This oil supply, for example, also control and affect their price in the market, right? Their price in the market highly contingent on the fuels that produce these people's direct products at the end of the day, right? Having the polar opposite political statement where you said you will ban these commodities 2 years ago, and then suddenly you want to lift up the ban, for example, is very problematic. People will not be your trading partner because the inconsistency of your political maneuver and inconsistency of your directive might come at the cost of their people dying. This is the reason why this is something that they do not want to trade off, and this is the reason why EU will not become a lucrative trading partner for them at the end of the day, right? So one engagement towards Deputy Prime Minister's speech, right? They told you the reason why they want to propose this proposal to immediately lift the ban, it is because the alternatives such as sunflower might not necessarily fulfill our demand at the end of the day. But what they forgot to analyze is that even if the quantity of this sunflower oil supply is not enough, ladies and gentlemen, but EU is also the biggest investor to research and development. There has been a lot of billions of US dollars investment that they have poured for this particular alternative at the end of the day, right? They have been able to contribute their human resources as the investment to develop this particular sunflower oil and so on and so forth, right? Not only that, they also work with a lot of multinational corporations that work in the development of these sunflower alternatives, ladies and gentlemen. What does this mean? Maybe it is true that maybe the quantity is not yet enough. But I think that it is not fair for you to compare the supply of crude palm oil with an entity that is just developed at the end of the day. That's number one. But number two, multi-billion US dollars investment have been poured towards this research and development, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why we do not necessarily think that is fair and that is not within the interest for you to pursue, right? I'm going to extend this more in my point of substantive. So let's talk about what kind of political precedents that EU wants to leave, ladies and gentlemen, because I think that this is directly engaging to the Deputy Prime Minister's speech, talking about political ally, right? Look, exactly, EU is not in the best ideal economic condition, ladies and gentlemen. There is Brexit, there is COVID-19 that hamper their economic development, right? Exactly because of this condition, what we need is to show a good precedence on how consistent we are on our directive regarding global supply chains, regarding oils and other type of commodities, ladies and gentlemen. Because the metrics that other countries use to make you their trading partner or political ally, one of them is your consistent political behavior, right? Because a policy that you change, for example, a policy that you suddenly lift up does not affect you as a single country, but also affect your trading partner at the end of the day. Or, in this case, when we talk about a bigger entity such as European Union, it might affect the entire international trading situation, ladies and gentlemen. Due to European Union is one of the biggest political entities that plays a vital role in international politics and also international trading, right? This is the reason why flipping and showing this inconsistency at the end of the day is not going to fulfill the goal that Deputy Prime Minister wants, which is to have more political ally at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, because it is going to be worse under your side of the house. Look, let's leave the debate about the benefit of crude palm oil and the benefit of sunflower, right? I'm talking because maybe it is not comparable at the end of the day. But I think when I want to engage to the case that has been brought by Deputy Prime Minister saying about political ally at the end of the day. So I think that political ally can only be achieved under our side of the house, because even if, for example, sunflower is not the best alternatives that we have in the current status quo, but your political behavior that show consistency is something that is already lucrative for the European Union, especially in the context when our economy is falling down. So what is the comparative under team opposition? So not immediately lifting this proposal will result two things. Number one, as I have mentioned to you before, that we are going to be seen as a sustainable political or trading partner. But number two, when we lift, engaging to the scenario, when we lift this directive, ladies and gentlemen, I think that the harm is not going to be as detrimental as what government team try to envision, right? Why? Because we don't lift it immediately. It means it gives room for all parties involved, such as our trading partner, for example, to do policy adjustment, right? Their economic climate can be adjusted. The availability of their job opportunities, for example, can only be adjusted. The investment that we have been pouring to these sunflower alternatives, ladies and gentlemen, can also be recalculated and adjusted at the end of the day, right? But secondly, our decision when we lift, ladies and gentlemen, might come with a rational decision at the end of the day, because we made the decision after we see the response to this dispute settlement panel first, right? And then we decide, right? This is the reason why the decision that we take under opposition side of the house is the decision decision that comes after the long deliberation from countries because of this dispute, the settlement panel at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, when we decide, for example, to lift up this particular directive, I think that this dispute settlement panel will also give compensation towards us, right? Whenever the result and the decision of these panels, for example, is not within our interest at the end of the day. So they will be able to opt in and also help us to smoothen the transitional process that we can endure during the decision of this particular panel at the end of the day, because it is within their accountability to begin with, right? So I think that all of the harm and also the benefit that team government wants is highly contingent on the prerequisite of team opposition, and it is going to be better on the rest of the House. We are very proud to stand on opposition.
Okay, I thank Randy for the speech. For final responses against the opposition, Ariel, the floor is yours.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate should be talking about EU's needs and economical stand, especially within this COVID-19 scenario right now, which is still currently happening and seems to have been rejected by the opposition side of the House. As well as we also need to talk about the actually environmental case, where we see the opposition's case only focus on the political stance, etc. Because here in the government side of the House, we notice that the decision at the end of this debate directly impacts the EU, right? Whereby we actually have to bring the solution that actually benefits the EU best, right? So by the parameter that I've already placed, it is clear that the government should be the one who takes this debate, as we are the only team within this debate who actually gives the best exclusive benefits towards this EU. But I will strengthen my statement with two clashes that I highlight in this debate. First, regarding most benefits to EU economically, and second, regarding the environment, right? First regarding the most benefit to EU economically, right? This is important, right? Because in this debate, we are talking about us ourselves as EU, right? What is actually the best for us? What is the best for us economically, right? Because it is something obvious that should have already been noticed as well by the opposition side of the House, that we should actually prioritize. We should be able to actually prioritize money at this kind of case, because obviously we need money, especially with the characterization that my previous speakers have already brought, right? Where there's actually a huge pandemic directly affecting EU, and EU itself has already experienced Brexit, where a huge stakeholder has already pulled out of their system, causing a huge damage towards the economic stance. Which means that here, what is the winner of this clash is the one who can actually bring the best solution towards EU's economy, right? Let's notice the opposition's case, right? They barely graze upon this economic status that even though my previous speakers have already highlighted, and despite the government's urgency, the government team's urgency regarding how economy should actually be highlighted here, that we have already planted since the very beginning, opposition's main case on economy is only regarding on how we're not going to be seen as reliable. That's why we're not going to be able to be seen as someone who can actually be seen to make actual deals with international relationships, right? So 3 responses towards this. First, notice on how much bad things they say upon our case. They do not actually say how economy is going to be better on their side, right? They keep saying how it's unfeasible on our side, but they do not give us a better promise here, right? So once I prove to you how then on government side of the House, it is going to be much more clear on how this economy can actually be helped, we believe that the opposition stance will fall, right? Because you notice that when notice that their stance here in the opposition team is that they want to stubbornly stick with the bad proposal that they have made 2 years ago, right? And they said that their main goal should actually be about being consistent with the plans that they have made, right? Second response, notice how this consistency is actually going to be harmful, right? It's going to be harmful when we stick to the political stance that the government team has already brought. Why? Because when we've already explained how harmful it is for us to stick with this stance, when the banning of palm oil or even going through with the WTO's panel is actually going to harm the EU more. What is going to happen is that this kind of bold stance to actually be consistent with the agreement is actually going to harm EU, right? So what is going to be seen is that we're going to be seen as consistent, but we're going to be seen as something that is consistently bad, because after we have already seen how much this deal actually harms us, how much is actually going to affect us, especially economically, how EU is willing to cut off international relations with other countries. That's going to be seen as EU as someone who is consistently stubborn, especially when something is already harming them. This is actually going to have a worse image within international relationships, right? Within international relations, right? Where other countries are going to see EU as someone who is not willing to change their mind after they have already been after the bad things have already been pointed out to them, right? This means that on the opposition side of the house, the unreliableness of having an international relationship with EU is going to be even more clear, right? Because they are not willing to change after the bad things have been pointed out to them. Here, notice that in a relationship, compromise has to happen. Both sides have to be able to make changes for one another. If not, that relationship is not going to work out. This goes as well with the relationship between EU and with other countries. When other countries have pointed out that this thing is bad, EU has to be able to make a change, and that is something that we do not want to consistently stick with, right? But last but not least, even if this switch will make EU, even if the sudden switch within the ban, the sudden pullback within the ban will make EU look like an unreliable decision maker that can suddenly change their mind. At the very least, on our side, we would like to admit that we are wrong. We would like to admit that something we propose is actually harmful, like how there was a certain moment of doubt when the EU was discussing about Brexit, right? Here, when we're able to admit that we're wrong, we want to be able to be able to accept that it's okay for us to actually make this kind of change, because the opposition team has not proven to us why this kind of change is actually going to be harmful, other than the status that they have already brought to us, right? We believe that when we're able to show that we can actually compromise, it can actually open up to more deals with the other countries, right? Unlike on the opposition side, where they're only going to be stubborn and they're going to only suffocate themselves, right? So here on the government side, it is clear from the very beginning that our goal is to actually bring what is best for the EU, right? After our two portrayals, first regarding how other alternatives is not going to be as accessible as palm oil and how we actually desperately need this for our everyday lives. And second, how if this ban continues or if the WWO actually backlashes onto us, the biggest harm is going to only impact towards us ourselves, especially after we already explained this kind of portrayal. Every time we already explain this kind of portrayal, we believe that the government team is the only one that can bring exclusive economic solutions towards the EU. But towards my second clash here, right, regarding the environment, because the main reasoning of the ban by the EU is actually due to the sake of the environment. Here we believe that this is an important clash to talk about, right? Where opposition team only promises better regulation when the deal is made, when they actually promise this ideal scenario on how these people can just talk it out and make the best case solution, right? So first response, notice how this case is so ideal because simply they do not explain this step process analysis, right? How is it going to be that this panel is actually be able to talk this thing out that can actually bring this kind of ideal scenario, right? But second thing, notice how this ideal scenario actually makes out in the very end of the day. How is it that when the opposition team have already explained to us that this kind of process will take years to happen, how is it that the environment is not going to actually be damaged in the process, right? But even if somehow this entire process actually, this entire ideal process that they have portrayed to us actually succeeds, like how in the end of the day that somehow these two parties can actually work together and everything, we believe that in the end, EU is still going to be the one negatively impacted, right? Because here where Indonesia and Malaysia can still export towards other parties, we believe EU's main source of palm oil and something that they desperately need only comes from there, right? So if the deal actually goes wrong, it's going to impact exclusively towards the EU, right? On the government side, here we do not want this kind of harms that the opposition team has promises onto us, right? We bring the more feasible and beneficial process by actually immediately removing this ban, by actually admitting that we are actually wrong, where we actually want to show that we are willing for change, we are willing for compromise, and this can actually show us that we are going to be able to be a better deal in the future, right? Only by the exclusive arguments that have been portrayed by the government side of the house, we believe we stand the strongest in this debate. We proudly propose. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ariel, for the speech. Now, for final responses against the government side, I would like to call upon Dio. The floor is yours.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Three classes is debate, right? Number one, whether it is being environmentally friendly country is within AU interest. Secondly, on whether or not this will going to harm the economy of AU. Thirdly, whether AU will going to lose the dispute settlement. This is something that always being questions by opening governments by the governments at the house, right? So if we can actually prove why on these three classes we can actually win in those three classes we can actually win in this debate, right? So first of all, independent rebuttal. They say that sunflower oil is actually not accessible to everyone because they need to adapt to certain climate. I think there is a logical flaw that happening in that argument because like exactly we don't want to immediately lift the ban because we can see it is need for the development, right? I think the development can only exist when there is a demand that happens toward the sunflower oil. For example, like we need funding to actually create a further development of the sunflower oil to be able to be accessible to everyone. For example, to actually like make the sunflower oil to be like work, or like we can actually give to like this certain technology that can convert the sunflower oil to be like much more accessible, even though your climate is actually shit as fuck, for example. And this demand will not happen unless palm oil, which is the alternative is banned, because the alternative of the palm oil is more popular because they're more cheaper. For example, they're most likely more produced, for example. So or especially companies will going to buy palm oil more than sunflower oil in the end of the day, right? So therefore if they say that if the contention was that our oil is not accessible, I think we can make it accessible in the future if the palm oil is banned, and therefore there's going to be immediately more demand towards sunflower oil, right? So I think that this proves to you on that rebuttal. But first classes then, whether or not it is being environmentally friendly country is within AU interest, right? They say that AU is being hypocrite because they contribute so much to the carbon emissions, right? Notice that changing for the better does not make it you being hypocrite. It makes you make amends to the mistake that you have made, right? This is not Amos, where you whenever you change, you're always going to be a bad person, right? We can see it. We do contribute to a certain extent to carbon emission, and that's exactly why we try to change, right? Why is that so? Because I think this is you interest. Because notice that this directive is called threat 2, right? So therefore there's a prequel of this threat, right? I think this directive is already happens and evolved throughout the years after changing so many council leaders that happening in the AU, right? So therefore I think this is not a new idea, but there are communal interest for AU to be like more environmentally friendly. But secondly, I think that this is also being interest of AU interest because they want to be like the first mover of renewable energies, right? The moment when they can actually evolve this kind of sunflower oil and develop them much further to be much more accessible to everyone, for example, I think it can make so much profit to the AU. So therefore, I think being environmentally friendly country is also within the EU interest, right? Thirdly, Charlie has already explained that AU suffers so much on climate change that hinders their productivity. For example, like they suffer from intense heat wave, for example, that hinders them to actually go to work, for example, and getting suntan and whatnot, right? But last but not least, AU has been the first move in creating renewable energies and initiating environmental discourses on international partner. That is why they become the host for Paris Agreement, right? So therefore, I think at the moment actually they immediately lift the ban of palm oil, the moment actually Indonesia actually dispute it, they're going to be seen as inconsistent. This is wherein the arguments matter. But why this is actually harmful? Because now we are losing power against US and China in terms of international discussion. So I think being environmentally friendly country can become our comparative advantage that, hey, I'm actually different from from US and China in a way that I am actually being environmentally friendly state, for example, that we are actually like want to save the world, for example, and whatnot. And I think this is something that can make us much more leverage in political discussion. Never been rebutted by the government of the house. They only brush away by say that, hey, political discussion is actually not the discussion is debate. No, as long as we can prove to you that this motion actually after motion that is as AU, so therefore as we can prove to you on how this benefited the AU, I think that it still can it still can enter the debate, right? But let's talk about on how this on that discussion, like whether or not this is going to harm the economy. Let's brush away on the idea that this is going to harm Indonesia, Malaysia, or like any developing countries' economy, right? They never link back to why why Indonesia and Malaysia's economy suffering will going to impact toward the AU, because notice that this motion is actually talking about as AU, right? So therefore, as long as it doesn't link back, as AU, I don't care if Indonesia is actually suffering. If Amos can eat tomorrow, like I don't fucking care, right? But like they never actually explain why Indonesia and Malaysia is a beneficial trade partner, because they want to say that the moment actually we lose Indonesia and Malaysia, this is going to harm our economy. They never explain why Indonesia and Malaysia is a beneficial trade partner, right? Notice that trade is intersectional. Malaysia disagreement with EU in terms of oil does not lose the dependency of other trades to EU, like kitchen appliances, for example, right? So therefore, I think that the connection between Malaysia and EU in terms of trading of kitchen appliances, for example, and therefore is going to benefit our economy, still stands in the end of the day, right? But secondly, they said this is going to kill the economic productivity of the world. Number one, we are told you why the fuck should I care? But secondly, this harm is symmetric, because when you're using palm oil, you're also being environmentally destructive. What with the massive carbon emission that palm oil energy produce, right? That's what you're going to can work because of the intense heat wave, for example, or you're going to create a massive forest fire due to deforestation that this kind of palm oil commodities trade and whatnot, and therefore it's going to create massive smoke in which they cannot go outside and whatnot. And I think this is going to harm your productivity also, right? Third classes, whether AU will lose this dispute settlement, right? So they say that the case will most likely will going to fail, because environment should not be the factor in trade, right? Look, I think regardless that environmental is actually be the factor in trade, it is actually comes on the goodwill, right? That AU actually want to save the world. When it comes to dispute settlement, you have to be morally wrong in that case, right? And I think the trend in terms of international trade is being environmentally friendly. That is why, for example, like Kyoto Protocol or like Paris Agreement, Charlie Protocol, whatever that shit. Where if you do environmentally destructive, you will get high tariffs, and therefore I think this is part of the trade deal, right? So therefore, on that precedence, we prove to you that being environmentally friendly is also being one of the factor in terms of trade. So therefore, when we actually act as act in terms of goodwill, I think we can still win in the dispute settlement, right? But even if yes, that we're going to fail, I think it's okay, right? Number one, I think that when actually we lose this dispute settlement, knowing that in terms of settlement in law, there's a compensation to the losing party, right? I think the compensations, when, for example, in the very absolute best case on the sales of the house, when we are actually going to fail and we still going to be forced to leave the ban, the compensation will going to be used to give the job to these workers that has involved in the development of sunflower oil that are already being explained by Randy. Now that they are not being used anymore, right? Because sunflower oil is going to lose the market and whatnot. On outside the house, we're going to minimize the future harm, because we can prepare now. Because we can now prepare, now we can envision the worst case when actually in Q3 2021 we're going to lose the dispute settlement. We already have like 1 year to plan from now, and not being immediately lift the ban, right? So therefore we can like plan the worst case scenario. We can open up job market, for example, and we can like make a stimulus check and whatnot to this kind of workers. So therefore the economic harm is going to be minimalized the moment when when our market and our development and all of the opportunity costs that we have already spent on this kind of sunflower oil will going to be minimalized, right? In outside the house, when you immediately lift the ban, you're going to create a sudden loss of jobs. Especially this is important in COVID, when actually lost job is actually losing job is something that is actually already been a hot issue to begin with, right? So therefore, we're going to make a protest for this kind of to the government. Now that you create this kind of lost job, I think this is not what AU want. We are very proud to oppose.
Okay, I thank Dio for the speech. Now to summarize the whole case coming from the opposition, I call upon...
Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are 3 things I'm going to bring in my speech. Number 1, let's talk about economic impact. Number 2, let's talk about environment. And last but not least, let's talk about politics and also bargaining power of European Union, right? So first of all, let's talk about economy. Look, team government told you that it is actually bad for economy simply because these sunflower alternatives might not be sufficient to our needs at the end of the day, right? But we have told you, ladies and gentlemen, 2 things. Number 1, the comparative is not fair at all because you do not give them, for example, more money and more opportunities, for example, especially when our people has been habituated with the idea of crude palm oil when they would like to operationalize their economic activity, ladies and gentlemen. But number 2, I think that the economy under their side of the house is going to be worse, right? Because European Union, the context that they dismiss is that it's also a leading initiator towards a greener technology and a greener economy, ladies and gentlemen. That is to say, European Union has been able to invest 100,000 billion US dollars, for example, towards these sunflower alternatives to actually change the crude palm oil, ladies and gentlemen. They also invest their manpower to be the scientists on research and development towards this sunflower at the end of the day, right? So they need to be able to define a world where they are willing to trade off all of the investment of this sunflower sunflower with the uncertain benefit that they are trying to champion in this debate, right? But also, I think that the economic loss is going to be bigger under your servant house. Why is that so? Because you do not give room to yourself and also your trading partner and also the international community to actually adjust their economic policy. Remember, European Union economic policy and trading policy might be able to affect the entire globe simply because they are regaining power as the biggest political entity in the international politics, right? That is to say, whenever they suddenly change and flip stances, other countries will also be affected. But under our sort of the house, maybe they're affected. But the problem is that there is always room for an economic policy adjustment, and I think that it is going to be better under our side of the house. Immediately changing it will not give this opportunity on the transitional process for these stakeholders in order to adjust their policy, ladies and gentlemen, right? And third of all, I think that economy is going to be one under our side of the house, because in 2018, when you said that you are going to ban this crude palm oil, other corporations would like to have started their transformation into sunflower alternatives. But the moment when you change it again, I think that there will be a sudden change of business models and also a lot of productivity from this corporation that might also affect your economy at the end of the day, right? So I don't see any reasons why economy is going to be better under the rest of the house. Second, talking about environment. They told you that European Union also produce carbon emission. Yes, it is true, but what they don't realize is that our interest is also to delay and stop climate change. So the question would become, who creates better outcome at the end of the day, right? I think it is going to be us, because immediately lifting the ban on palm oil will make the environment even worse, ladies and gentlemen. The environment make European Union, for example, I think like fighting for environment at the very least will make European Union to be more lucrative for those countries who are environmentally friendly at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, right? Because we are able to utilize the narrative of environment and actually protecting environment because of this narrative of not immediately lifting this particular ban, right? This is the reason why environment, sticking on the status quo, sticking on our stance to care about environment will give us an actual change in environment and also regaining power for those countries who are environmentally friendly, ladies and gentlemen. But last but not least, something that they never respond is talking about the political power, right? I think that this dispute settlement under our side of the house, when we fail in the worst case scenario, I think that the dispute settlement body will be able to be accountable towards us, right? This is the reason why they will opt in and also join hand to be able to provide a smoother transition and also smoother solution for us, because we are within their accountability at the end of the day. But last but not least is talking about the consistency at the end of the day. I think that people want to cooperate with you if you're consistent with the policy, right? I think that this is something that is lucrative under our side of the house. Very proud to stand on opposition.
Okay, I thank Randy for the speech. Now, to end the debate, I would like to call upon Amos. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Going to start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm gonna talk about three things, right? First, I'm going to talk like about environment. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the economy, and thirdly, I'm going to talk about like political relations and soft power that's basically also a clash in this debate, right? Number one, regarding environment, like this is like probably the biggest case coming from opposition, but I think that their explanation was talking about mainly how being green is something that is important towards EU, for example, right? I think that there's like a couple of problems here, right? Number one, I would like to challenge if this is actually, even if this is important, I don't understand why this is their priority, right? Because even though they've explained that EU has heat waves or whatever, like why heat waves is harmful to begin with, because it disrupts like certain parts of the economy, right? So therefore, like the end goal of that at the end of the day should probably still be the wait, Charlie, shut up. Okay, it should probably like still be like parts of the economy as well, right? I mean, if even if like this is about like suffering of like certain people or whatever, I think that economy can also have like really harmful things as well, right? For example, I think economy can make people maybe not get enough subsidies or not get basic needs. I think like those type of examples, those type of harms like happen regardless, right? Anyway, like this isn't even like the main thing that EU is investing right now, right? I mean, even if it is, I like it's never done by trade to begin with, right? Usually, it's like they always prioritize things like China, even if they want to trade, like even though China harms the economy by a lot, they still trade with US anyway. So even if this is something that is important for the opposition, I think like what is most important is what we have already brought to you, right? On how they're prioritizing certain economies, like how they're like prioritizing like things like trade as well, right? So I think like their whole case about environment, even though like to an extent it's elaborated, I just don't think how that is like important, like how that is important, right? But okay, now let's talk about trade. So what does opposition actually bring to the table, right? So opposition, so basically opposition is saying that we will be seen as inconsistent and no one wants to trade with us, right? I think that this doesn't make a lot of sense because this is an argument against like policy changes in general, I think, right? Like I mean, like there's already 2 years when we actually have implemented these type of bans, and I think that would actually mean that means that we're not changing it in like in a very rapid pace. I think like we have like amount of time where we can actually see, right? I mean, if their argument on opposition is that this will be a rational decision, I don't see why we can't make those type of decisions right now because we already clearly have the impacts, right? I think that their argument regarding that is feeble as compared to what government has already brought, right? Government brought the idea, specifically which actors that are being harmed, right? Places like Indonesia or Malaysia. So what you just said to us is basically saying that why the heck does EU care? I think that I've already provided explanations as well, right? My argument wasn't necessarily that these countries were going to suffer and I'm not going to be able to eat. It's about them finding other trading partners as well, right? I mean, I've already explained how that means that they are going to reduce other trades with us as well. Even if Charlie doesn't buy the idea of like embargo, I mean, like there's still big markets anyway, and I think that case should ideally still stand, right? But um, like I've already explained too in terms of like soft power, like this wasn't responded by the way by the opposition on how this empowers our oppositions as well, right? I mean, EU's opposition, such as like Russia, and how it actually diminishes like EU's effectivity on embargo towards them, right? I think that this has never been responded by opposition side of the house, and their idea of like political alliances is just basically going forward with the idea of like only environment, which honestly I don't think like many countries are even thinking as this is something important, right? Because most countries just want to care about their economy. Like most countries just trade on the basis of on the economy as well. I don't understand why they would have like environment in their calculations. So with that, I'm very proud to propose.
All right. So thank you for the debate. Now, before the results and also the reasons, first general comments. In this debate, I think both sides of the house need to explain on the economic model that you're talking about, because at the end of the day, both sides of the house try to illustrate that palm oil is really an object of reliance. But at the end of the day, the reliance on both palm oils and also the sunflower oil is not really there in the debate. So it's hard to see the exclusivity and also the exclusive benefit of having palm oil in EU or not having palm oil in EU. That's the first one. Secondly, is on this one. All of the ideas are not interconnected to the EU's interest at the end of the day. So it's lacking in the comparative, and also the characterization on Indonesia and Malaysia was not really there. Considering that in the context slide, you need to also further explain on the process of the deforestation that is happening in Indonesia and Malaysia, so that you can take a conclusion as to why banning is necessary for the opposition side of the house. Whereas the government side of the house, you need to also explain why at the end of the day behavioral changes, or at the end of the day the incentive for Indonesia and Malaysia to cooperate with EU will be there. Because I think both sides of the house try to illustrate your idea about that. For example, in the opposition, you want a sustainability of the environment, but without necessarily explaining as to why Indonesia and Malaysia will never change at the end. Although there is an attempt on the leader of opposition, but at the end of the day, it is not linked back as to why sustainability will be achieved. Same goes to the government side at the end of the day, when government side believes that the trade and such will be there, but there is no explanation as what is the incentive of both Indonesia and Malaysia to begin with. Thus, it can happen with the partnership with EU. Lastly, on the engagement. Unfortunately, in this debate, there is an environnomic debate on the environment versus economy, but both sides of the house did not take the bullet as to why sacrificing the environment in a certain time or sacrificing the economy in a certain time is a worthy trade-off to begin with. Therefore, under two clashes, I finally gave the winning to the opposition side of the house with a close margin. On the EU's interest on economic rejuvenation versus environmental preservation. Second clash on the marginal harms and benefit. Lastly, in regarding on policy changes. Now going to the first clash on EU's interest, that is economic rejuvenation versus environmental preservation. On this clash, the reason why I finally gave it to the opposition was because of this. In the government side, government believes that this will only reduce the commodity of EU because some nations or some economic model in certain nation need palm oil to begin with. Thus, lifting the ban is very necessary, but there is no further analysis as to why the economic model is heavily reliant on that palm oil to begin with. This has been responded by the opposition side of the house earlier when they believe that alternatives are already there. For example, like making a wind power, solar panel, and whatsoever that is a renewable energy that has been there to foster the economic model. Secondly, is on this. Even the opposition side of the house have to engage to your best case that saying that even in the best case palm oil becomes the tool or becomes the engineer of the economy, at the end of the day the abundance of the demand will only harm the sustainability of the business because it will only permit more harms towards the rainforest and such. Therefore, at the end of the day, this carbon emission will only harm the sustainability, so that opposition succeeded in engaging even to your best case. There is a certain marginal harm that will exist in the world of the government side of the house. That is the environmental preservation. Secondly, on the access on trade that has been brought by the government side. This was a potential point. However, I don't see any further analysis as to why, at the end of the day, Indonesia and Malaysia will all of a sudden have the incentive on opening the access to cooperate with EU. So unfortunately, when the process analysis was not really there, the adjudicators cannot take into the conclusion as to why the access on trade will be widespread under the world of the government side of the house. On the economic benefit, opposition also succeeded in proving why, at the end of the day, in your side, the disruption of the economic sustainability will still be there by saying that the loss of job will be there when the alternative, that is the sunflower oil production, will be harmed at the end. For example, like investment will be wasted, research and development will go for nothing, employment will be lost and such. That point has neutralized the economic benefit that has been brought by the whole government bench. So therefore, on the first class, on the economic rejuvenation, it's not compelling in comparison to the environmental preservation that is heavily explained by the opposition under the idea of sustainability. Therefore, first class goes to the opposition. Second clash on marginal harms and benefit as the aftermath. Government side brought in this debate by saying that the alternatives of using the sunflower oil will only lead to a certain harms. For example, like scarcity, unfair deals that will only kill the economy of the world. This point, unfortunately, on the end goal of your point is about how the economy of the world will be killed. Unfortunately, this conclusion, the adjudicators consider that this as a jumpy conclusion to begin with, because there is no further analysis as to why the whole economy of the world will be killed simply because there is a scarcity on the sunflower oil and also the unfair deal and such, because there is no explanation on the exclusivity of the sunflower oil to begin with. In comparison to the opposition, on the marginal benefit as the aftermath, opposition believes that in the concern on the image and the credentials of EU, they believe that environmental preservation becomes a comparative advantage, showing the commitment to maintain the environment will boost the likelihood of the certain countries to cooperate with them, because there is a saving the world narrative brought by the EU. So on that marginal benefit, even though there is still a further analysis that needs to be pointed out by the opposition, at least that I see there is a marginal benefit there rather than your marginal harm about killing the economy of the world. So therefore, on the second class, which is a minor class, goes to the opposition. Lastly, regarding on the policy changes. On this class, unfortunately, it was a deadlock between the government and the opposition. when opposition started this debate by saying that consistency is something that is very important, because at the end of the day, this will only sudden changes will only hamper the political partnership or even economic partnership to begin with. Number one, on this point, the adjudicators could not take this idea. It's because of, one, there is no further analysis as to what kind of partner that you're talking about in this debate, and B, why behavior becomes the metric of fostering the partnership to begin with. That point, I don't see any further analysis on the importance of cooperation based on the behavior rather than the impact. The responses coming from the government whip is about how changes and compromises should be there, but unfortunately, there is no explanation as to why adjustment is very necessary. Why at the end of the day we are currently in dire needs, and B, why at the end of the day, in the comparative of the opposition, why being idealistic will only create a certain harm. So on that point, because there is still a lot of question for both sides of the house, we could not give this clash to anyone. So therefore, under the two clashes that are leaning to opposition took the debate. So that's all from my verbal. Thank you and good luck for your, apapun itulah.